This is one of the most controversial phrases of the 2020s, and although I think it does get at the heart of a very real issue, it's often misunderstood. Today we're going to talk about how ownership is being eroded in 2025, but not in the way that you think. If you don't know me, I'm Spencer, and I like to talk about simple living, frugality, and digital minimalism. So first, let's rewind for a second and talk about how ownership was and has always been. Up until recently, ownership has always meant when you bought something, be it a movie, a book, a cup of coffee, or even a tool, you owned that thing. You could lend it out, you could fix it, you could sell it if you wanted to. There were no conditions, no updates, and no proprietary apps. At a certain point in history too, it felt like companies were making products that were actually good, that were built to last, buy it for life. Now all of that is getting rare. Back in the day when you bought something, you owned it, you didn't have to pay continual fees to keep using it. Once you bought it, it was yours and you could use it how you pleased. Nowadays, the situation is quite a bit different. Looking at our media landscape, things have changed a lot. Most people don't own physical forms of media anymore and get almost all of it digitally. I talk about this on the channel all the time, but there's an endless amount of streaming services now. Practically everyone is signed up for one of these to get their media, and the average person feels they're spending too much. The problem is though, the amount that we keep spending on streaming services keeps going up because the amount of streaming services in general keep growing. Content is becoming more and more stratified across all these different platforms, and you need to own more and more of them in order to get what you want. It really isn't far away from what we used to deal with cable packages in the past. And meanwhile, content that we paid for and purchased outright online, we don't own either. And you might think, well, I don't do much streaming. I actually buy all of my digital media. I buy my Kindle books. I buy digital downloads of movies I like. I pay for all that stuff outright. I'm not like that. Well, unfortunately, in 2025, you don't own those things either, and companies are making that more and more apparent to us customers. Some of this content, like movies you may have actually paid for, you still need to log on to Wi-Fi in order to watch it. Or with books you may have purchased through something like the Kindle store, publishers still can come into your device and make edits to the books or even change the covers. There's a notorious instance from 2009 where Amazon went into certain people's Kindles who had bought 1984 from a specific publisher and removed those books from those devices. The reason for it was the publisher wasn't actually allowed to be selling that copy of the book, and even though customers had paid for it, Amazon went into the devices and erased them. While clearly there was a legal thing happening behind the scenes here, this type of instance just underlines exactly how little we own the media that we pay for online. And if you think that was just a one-off from 15 years ago with Amazon, earlier this year, Amazon restricted people's rights from the Kindle books that they paid for. No longer were you able to use the download and transfer via USB button on Amazon's website to take the books that you had purchased from the Kindle store and upload them onto other devices. In my case, I own a Kobo e-reader, but I buy certain independently published books from Amazon's Kindle store from authors who only publish on the Kindle store. This was a way for me to support that artist, honestly and legally pay through Amazon to get copies of those books, and then use the download and transfer function to take those files and upload them directly to my Kobo. There's nothing legally gray about this, and this is fully in my rights to do. These independent publishers often don't put DRM on their books either, so it's very easy once you've downloaded it to copy it over and put it on another device, like a Kobo. This is another great example, in this case with Amazon, how you may have paid for something, but it doesn't mean that you own it. You can't do what you want with it. You can only do the very limited things that we say you can in the fine print. Similarly to what I mentioned with Amazon, there was also an issue that happened a year or two ago between Sony and Discovery. There was some sort of licensing issue between Sony and the Discovery Channel, and people who had purchased Discovery Channel shows like Mythbusters or Deadliest Catch and had them on their PlayStation devices were going to have them removed, even if they had paid for them outright. People who had bought seasons and seasons of these shows to watch on their PlayStation devices were no longer going to be able to access them just because of some licensing issue that customers had no control over. These types of things, this erosion of ownership, it's not something just happening in our digital media space, it's happening all over the marketplace. Another big thing is we're seeing software companies like Adobe and Microsoft taking software that you used to be able to pay for outright and making it only a subscription model. I work in the film industry and I do a lot of camera work and video editing. I remember about 15 years ago, I bought a copy of Adobe Premiere and I actually bought it outright to use on my computer. Back in the day, you used to be able to buy a disc with the unlock key on it, and I was able to actually own that software, that license. No perpetual payments, just a one-time deal, and I had exactly what I paid for. And Microsoft Office used to be the same way. There was a one-time fee and you owned Word and Excel and all of the other softwares that you wanted. Adobe has completely abandoned this and Microsoft has all but done the same. What these companies have found is that it's more profitable rather than to just sell you something once to make you pay for it forever. And in the case of Adobe, depending on how much software you have from them, you could be paying $20, $40 to even $100 a month to have a license to use that software. And you're going to be keep paying that for as long as you need it. And this type of thing, this perpetual payment model, it's even occurring in products which you had paid for and you thought, I have to own this. I physically am holding it and I paid for it. And folks, to quote Dennis Nedry, we have companies like BMW who tried to sell their customers $100,000+ car and then charge them a monthly subscription to access their heated seats. Now I say try because there was enough customer backlash that BMW reversed this decision, but it's telling enough that companies are thinking about doing these things, and I think they will try and succeed to do them in the future. We're also seeing printers that have ink subscriptions and they will shut down your usage if you use a non-proprietary ink. He left a comment on one of my videos who had an oven that needed to connect to Wi-Fi to function. When the Wi-Fi wasn't working, they weren't able to turn on their oven. So as you can see, folks, we've come a very long way from the time when you could buy something and you could use it as you pleased. Another thing that I don't think gets mentioned enough is how companies have basically caught on to making things not last as long so they function similarly to a subscription. An example would be Apple and their cell phones. Apple has been known for gluing their batteries into their cases of their cell phones and their laptops and making it extremely hard for user repair. Apple and other companies have been caught trying to slow down products so that people feel like they need to upgrade. Now, I love my iPhone 13 mini and I'd like to keep using it for as long as I can. However, Apple doesn't want that. They want me to buy a new one. So by making the battery hard to change out when it eventually depletes and making the phone get extremely hot and slow and overheat, unintentional rhyme, they effectively make it so that you need to upgrade your phone every few years, even if you don't really want to, even if you're satisfied with the device you have. What makes me really annoyed is when companies take products that don't need any sort of smart features and jam them in there anyway. I think they do this for two different reasons. The first being a similar one to the planned obsolescence that I mentioned earlier. By making a light bulb that needs a proprietary app to use it, the light bulb can eventually be slowed down to a point that, hey, the app's upgraded to the point and has so many new features that your old light bulb just won't work anymore, so you gotta get a new one. Whereas a standard LED is supposed to last for years and years and years before it actually dies, one of these ones with some sort of proprietary Bluetooth thing inside of it might need to be switched out sooner when that part fails. The second reason, and another huge cash cow in this non-ownership world, is the lack of privacy and the fact that you can be tracked and monetized doing everything you do in your day-to-day life. Now, this is a whole other can of worms that I'm not going to open in today's video, but generally tracking is bad, at least in the hands of the people who are currently tracking us. So as you can see, there definitely is a very real threat to ownership here in 2025. Where 20, 30, or 40 years ago, you could buy something and be sure that you could keep it for a pretty long time. Nowadays, it's not so certain. Ultimately, as consumers living in this big shifting system, what can we do about it? One of the biggest things that I advocate for on this channel is getting a small curated collection of physical media. Picking those titles that no matter what you would like to have, be it books, movies, TV shows, or music. If you lost access to them, whether it's via a streaming service or a public library, or you just couldn't even buy them anymore, you would like to return to them again and again. For me, I have one drawer in my house which is dedicated to my movies and shows. I have a few VHS tapes of my favorite movies, and I have a few seasons of my favorite shows on DVD. I have a small collection of records, all my favorite rock albums, and some good Canadian folk ones as well. And I even have a small amount of CDs that I've been picking up as people have been throwing them to the curb that I've been keeping in my car for on-the-go listening. Referencing back to the situation with Amazon or even Sony and the Discovery Network, people aren't going to come into my house and change my book out for a more modern cover. Likewise, people aren't going to take one of my seasons of Family Guy and take out an episode that they don't think is appropriate anymore. And Netflix isn't going to come in here and take all of my VHS collection away, so I have to move to streaming. By keeping a small collection of physical media, I'm not turning away from the modern way of doing things completely, like streaming or subscription models. What I'm doing is reducing my dependence on those things, and I'm able to find a balance where the power isn't 100% on these companies. I'm able to subscribe to streaming services if I want to watch a particular thing, but I know that if I canceled all of those things, I still have a nice curated catalog of favorites that I can watch again and again, which I actually own. Another great way to go to avoid this encroachment of ownership that we're seeing, and just a good way to go to get better quality goods in general, is to buy older things and even antiques. For example, I do most of my cooking on cast iron skillets, and most of them I got secondhand as well. These are made super well, and some of my pans are nearly 100 years old. They're also not made from the newest non-stick coating, which in 10 years we're going to get told is cancerous and we have to upgrade. You can also do this with older electronics as well. For example, my TV is an old tube TV, but if I was going to buy a flat screen of some kind, I'd probably get like a 720p or 1080p LCD TV for like 20 bucks. In fact, fact, I might just pay $0 for those things because most days I see people dumping those on the street. With that, you have no smart TV, so you have no TV listening to you. You have no software that needs to be updated either. I will say quickly, there are a few instances where non-ownership can be beneficial. I'm not completely against non-ownership. Of course, we have the obvious example of renting over owning, which has its own perks that home ownership doesn't. There's a lot of benefits to home ownership as well, but I'm just saying renting does have its perks. Also, sharing tools and resources with friends, families, and neighbors is a great way to go as well. An example I could think of is borrowing my neighbor's snowblower after a big winter storm, and at some point they borrow my dehydrator so that they can dehydrate some apples. If each of us really only need those tools on a pretty irregular basis, we can borrow those things from one another and not need to store them in our home and pay for them ourselves. And finally, folks, getting back to that original phrase of you will own nothing and be happy. I think it's not really a matter of whether or not I own something, but in fact, who does own it? Getting back to that original, I think 2016 article, which really kicked off this idea, that article was really meant to be a thought experiment and a bunch of billionaires laying out what was already happening with companies like Netflix and Spotify changing what ownership meant and making it seem like they kind of had something to do with it, even though that's kind of just the natural direction that capitalism's moving in. But it was definitely being pitched in this article as some sort of idyllic future where you don't need to really pay for anything. You don't need to worry about a cluttered home. All of this stuff is given to you for free and you can just enjoy it and use it as you please. And I think the point that's being missed here is that a lot of people take this idea to be some sort of communist plot where the government is going to make you live and do what they want and eat bugs. But this whole you will own nothing and be happy thing, it's not about the government owning all of these services. It's about big corporations owning more and more of these services. And that's something that's happening right beneath our noses. For example, I wouldn't feel like I needed to own so many records or DVDs or VHS tapes or books if our library systems were more funded and I could get access to those things whenever I wanted them. If there were truly great free public resources available where we could share these things, I wouldn't be opposed to utilizing them. The problem is instead of funding our library systems, we're getting Kindle Unlimited, or instead of me being able to get movies or DVDs from the library, I get Netflix or Spotify and I have to pay for them. Same with public transit. I think in that article they even mentioned public transit, but the future isn't going to be one where we have nice public transit systems which we're able to ride free as citizens. The situation is going to be that everybody doesn't have a car and we all have to pay to use something like Uber. And in that situation where the corporations are in charge of our future and our well-being, companies that don't obviously give that much of a hoot about us and more so about profit, then the workers and the customers get screwed. Again, people have taken you will own nothing and be happy into this kind of government conspiracy that this deep state is trying to make you eat bugs and take away your DVD collections. In fact, it's companies trying to turn everything into a subscription so you have to pay endlessly for them and they can get rich off of you while doing it. Ultimately, I think there needs to be a balance here, and I think we need to vote, actually vote, and vote with our dollars for what we want. I think a little bit of subscriptions isn't a bad thing. I think using something like Netflix to watch a show or a movie you haven't seen, it isn't that dissimilar with going to Blockbuster back in the day to rent something that you hadn't seen then. But back in the day, it would have become a problem if we went to Blockbuster for every single show and movie we ever watched. And that's kind of where we're going with Netflix and Spotify and all of these streaming services. The balance can come from utilizing these things, but not overly relying on them so that these companies hold all of the power. And actually trying to get some of these free, good public services that we can actually share, like good public transit or library systems, better funded. I think that's a better way to go in the future rather than giving all of our money to Netflix. Ultimately, folks, I don't know how this is going to end up, but I do see that there is a clear erosion of our ownership in 2025. And these are some of the things that I'm thinking and things that I'm doing about it. I support my library quite regularly. I ride the public transit as much as I can, even though I do have a car, and I buy physical media, but I don't pay too much. When I use a streaming service, I use it to a limited degree and I cancel it. And that is the biggest thing you can do to streaming services, to grab them where it hurts and really take the power back. And that is called churn. It is signing up, using it for as long as you need, and then canceling it. Because these streaming services, they hope you're going to sign up like a person at a low price gym and you're going to sign up and stick with it for life. I'd be interested in hearing from you in the comments now. What do you think about the state of ownership in 2025 and what are you doing about it to take your power back as a customer? Thank you very much for watching, folks, and I'll see you in the next one.